and here we are in week, what are we, week 4 already of the 3, 4? 3. This is week 3. This is week 3 of the workshop in the history of material text. The semester is clearly already a blur. Great to have you all. Nice turnout. You don't, for some strange reason, know who I am. I'm John Pollack. I'm one of the curators here and one of the co-organizers of the very long-running workshop in history of material texts. Lurking out there in Zoom land is our founding director, Peter Stallybrass. I think I see his name on the screen. Our other co-directors and our graduate assistant are, hello, Peter. There he is, looking very comfortable in New England. Our other co-directors and graduate assistant are all atoning at the moment, so I am your sole director, but thank you to Lynn Farrington sitting over there, because it is impossible actually to run a hybrid workshop with about 4 or 6 pairs of hands. So Lynn will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A. She's also going to circulate the sign-in sheet, which we appreciate you putting your name on, as per usual. But if there are some folks who are new to the seminar, this is always a chance for me to welcome you and invite you to come to as many of these open seminar meetings as you can, and to invite your friends and colleagues. I think it's very important to stress that this is an interdisciplinary workshop, that we love it from people of all fields. When people of all fields come to things that perhaps they may think they're not familiar with, because in fact, the insights you have from your discipline can be really crucial to someone who may apparently be in another discipline, but is actually perhaps working on very similar questions of materiality or textuality or all those kinds of things. So this seminar works well when people from many different walks of academic life come together. It also works well when we have as many younger scholars and students as we have, let's say, more seasoned ones. So also please encourage your grad students, even your undergraduates, yes, to come. They can learn a lot, and we can learn a lot from them. So I say that every week, but it's very important to the health of the seminar that that passage of knowledge continues. Announcements are just a couple. Lynn is reminding me that we have a curatorial talk series here called From the Kislak Stacks, and that will be beginning our fall semester presentations this coming Friday. Our library colleague Bree Gettleson, who's our Latin American studies librarian, will be giving a virtual talk this Friday at noon, called Afterlives of Insurgency, focusing on a new Central American political poster collection that she has been instrumental in acquiring. Those talks happen at noon. They happen virtually, and for more information, pick up one of these little brochures on the rack right outside the door on your way out, or check in with any of us here. Other announcements, Lynn, Sean, anybody?
Well, next week we have the new acquisition show.
Oh yeah, one other announcement. Becoming attractions. This will this is fun. And if Zoomers, you're not too far from Philadelphia, I invite you into town. A week from Wednesday, not this week, but a week from Wednesday afternoon in this central space here, we have what we call a new acquisitions showcase. This is basically a giant show and tell where my colleagues have a chance to display our new acquisitions, that are things we've purchased, things we've been given from many different disciplines and sections of our special collections, world, empire, whatever we're called. And we'll basically assemble all these on all these tables in a sort of similar array between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. next Wednesday. It's a completely open house kind of setup. You can wander in, look around. We will be here to explain some of these things. It's usually kind of amazing, even for us who work here, to see the range of things that this department has acquired, and you may find some surprises in your own discipline, and you may come up with ideas to suggest to us about what we should be acquiring. Like, I'm hoping that we'll work with people like Reyhan to bolster our holdings in some of her fields of 19th century America that we're going to hear about tonight. So that's a week from Wednesday, 2 to 6 p.m. here in this space. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm really excited about tonight's presentation. And to present Reyhan Durmaz, who reminded me that she arrived at Penn not so long ago, but it was in the, shall we say, tumultuous academic year of 2019-20. So it feels like she's just gotten here, because just that's the way it is. And she is assistant professor in the religious studies department. And tonight, as you'll hear, she's going to be speaking to us about Arabic newspapers in 19th century America and the many lives of Ottoman and Syrian immigrant communities in 19th century America. She's teaching a related seminar in our department. She's based in the department this year called Orthodox America, which will also be using the resources of the Historical Society. And so tonight's talk, I think, will be quite anchored in what we might call early America, 19th century America. Now, I'm just getting to know Reyhan's work, but some of you who may know it might be a little surprised because her first book, which came out only last year, entitled Stories Between Christianity and Islam, takes us to a very different world, the world of late antiquity. It is, just to be very brief, we might say, a story about storytelling, and it is a fascinating project to unpack the multiple ways, the multiple vehicles of religious and cultural exchange between Christians and Muslims in the Middle East. Again, sort of focusing on late antiquity. The stories she tells in that book are extraordinary, and she's really revealing, I think, a whole range of intimate and extended cultural exchange that has received very little attention. So, as I say, that's a narrative from the late antique, and here we are launching, straddling eras to come to 19th century America. So I'm looking forward to seeing that leap, and I'm going to turn it over to Reyhan right now. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. As I'm settling myself here, it's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for being here. As soon as I put up my slides up there, I'll do that with you. Great. So I will speak about a 19th century New York-based newspaper that subverted a common understanding in America around that time that equated whiteness with being Western and Christian. So as many of you know, and as John just recently highlighted, I'm a historian of late antiquity and the medieval Middle East. So what am I doing here? This was the question I asked myself about 2 years ago when I started working on Kawkab Amrika, literally the Star of America, the first Arabic newspaper in the US. My interest in the geographical, chronological, and conceptual boundaries of the medieval Middle East often brings me to the discussions of American and European missionaries in the Middle East as a turning point in the historical narratives of the region. And I read about Kawkab in one of those moments of indulgence when I was reading about 19th century newspapers in the Middle East and elsewhere. Then, with a generous URF grant from the Office of the Vice Provost, here at Penn, I've been exploring the paper. Together with two brilliant graduate students, Rawad Behbe, who is right here, and Ali Nouri, who is, I think, on Zoom, we started translating and studying Kawkab Amrika. By the way, many issues of the paper are digitally available through the Moise Khairallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies, but only about 189 of them. So in your archival work, if you come across any issues, please let me know. Okay, so I will first situate us within the broader historical context here, and then we will dive right into the content of Kawkab Amrika. So the newspaper was founded in New York City in 1892 by two brothers, Najib and Ibrahim Erbili, who had immigrated from Ottoman Syria. The Erbilis were among the forerunners of the Syrian colony in New York City, which was a hopping neighborhood of Syrian immigrants in Lower Manhattan from about 1880s to 1940s. Najib and Ibrahim's parents, Joseph and Mary, had immigrated from Syria in 1878 and initially settled in Tennessee. And here they are sitting in the middle and surrounded by their son. The Erbili family is probably the first Syrian family to immigrate to the US. Their arrival made the national news in America, and here you see a snippet from the New York Daily Herald that the headline "Free at Last" talks about how these Christians immigrated. They were free from the tyranny of the Ottoman Empire. But then this very short note also notes how they were not able to spell their names in English. So the Erbili family became quite a spectacle for the weird clothes they wore and the foreign language they spoke. Members of the Erbili family, in fact, traveled to DC, to Philadelphia, New York City, and other places as performers reenacting Middle Eastern life. Despite being strangers in America, they were not peddlers, unlike most of their Syrian compatriots. Joseph Erbili, who is holding that sign here, Najib and Ibrahim's father, was a professor, and he was educated and later taught at the Orthodox Patriarchal College at Damascus. When the family moved from Damascus to Beirut, right before their immigration to the US, he assisted the American Protestant mission in Beirut in translating the scriptures to Arabic. Najib and Ibrahim were educated at the Syrian Protestant College in Beirut, now the American University of Beirut, and were medical doctors and were prolific intellectuals. Najib, the gentleman on the left here, was appointed as a consul in Jerusalem for a while, worked for the immigration service on the Ellis Island when it was founded in 1829, the year when Kawkab was founded, and he worked also as a translator for the Immigrants. Ibrahim, the gentleman on the right, who is also the elder brother, wrote an Arabic-English grammar book that you see here. So they seem to have dedicated their work and intellectual endeavors to the cultural exchange between America and the Middle East. And Kawkab Amrika was one of their projects that was purely dedicated to this cultural intermediation. So in the inaugural issue of Kawkab, published on April 15, 1892, we read that the general manager was Artin Efendi Petrakyan, and Abraham and Najib, here in this note, are mentioned as the editors and proprietors. But who was included to what extent in the management of the paper is rather debated. Similarly, the later years of the paper were precarious in terms of administration and patronage. In 1898, for example, due to the factionalism within the newspaper, a group of Syrian Maronites initially working at Kawkab cut their affiliations with the paper and founded the newspaper Al-Huda in Philadelphia. But leaving the details about the management aside for a moment, this was a paper founded and at least initially edited by Arabic-speaking Orthodox Christians from Ottoman Syria. This Orthodox identity was, of course, very much entwined with other religious affiliations. The Erbilis, as I mentioned, were educated at Protestant schools in the Middle East. Their immigration to the US was sponsored by a Presbyterian college teacher, and they attended Quaker meetings in the US. So this religious connections and networks of the family becomes a complex background for Kawkab. If you allow me, I want to say a bit more about the newspaper's background, then we will turn to its content. When Kawkab was founded, various ethnic papers were in circulation in New York City, such as the Hebrew Leader, the Jewish Daily News, Italiano in America, Neos Cosmos, and a few others. So Kawkab joined this diverse landscape as arguably the earliest public voice of Middle Eastern immigrants in America. There were, of course, individual writers who published, but this was probably the most prominent voice in that literary landscape. Due to this special place in American literary history, scholars have used the newspaper to reconstruct the history of nationalism, ethnic journalism, and communal identities in America. For example, Alika Naff's work, in Alika Naff's work, she describes Kawkab's place within the history of ethnic press in the US. Hani Bawardi briefly discusses the Erbili family's connection to the Ottoman bureaucracy. Elizabeth Bousahda comments on the broader international context in which Kawkab was founded. Diana Womack, in this article you see here, studies the ways these Syrian Christians understood religious, cultural, and national belonging. And finally, Linda Jacobs also presents a thorough reading of Kawkab and reconstructs the Syrian colony in 19th century New York City in her printed and online publications. Most of the photographs I've shown until now are due to and thanks to her extensive work on the Syrian colony. So Kawkab has been queried to answer questions about the history of Arab immigrants and their Middle Eastern and diasporic identities. But the literary features of this newspaper remain underexplored. To my knowledge, nobody has yet analyzed the style, mode of presentation, the very literariness of Kawkab as a site where identity was not only expressed, but also was changed and reformed and transmuted. I have an article myself coming up in the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, and in it I analyze the religious discourse in Kawkab. And in my talk today, I build on this previous work to see race and religion in America through the lens of Kawkab Amrika. So race-making in America, of course, has been a long and multifaceted process. I will not attempt to summarize it here, but I'll briefly mention two important developments happening in the late 19th century regarding racialization and religious pluralism. Many of you are, of course, familiar with these processes. So just I'll do this as a brief reminder. In the period from 1880 to 1920, the so-called Dor Ajar period, large populations from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia arrived at the ports of the US. And American law began to react to these sizable influxes by enacting new immigration limiting policies. One of the most famous of these legislations, for example, is the Chinese Immigration Act of 1882. In such legal discourse, American citizenship was articulated in racial terms. Racial distinctions between white, Black, and Asian were extensively discussed in law, but there was no clear formula about what constituted the white race. A person of the Caucasian race was a white person, according to the legislation of 1870. But then this definition was expanded and amended in the following decades to include Europeanness, fitness for freedom and self-governance, whiteness as common knowledge, assimilability, among others, in the definition of white. So white in the frame of American immigration legislation in many cases came to mean civilized, Fit for Democracy, and Christian in the late 19th century. As a result, ethnic and religious minorities in the US expressed their racial fitness for American citizenship through a variety of material and literary ways to navigate the changing policies. So that is thread number one. Around the same time, the notion of the religions of the world was developing in the US. By the time Kawkab was founded, 38 volumes of Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East had been published. And the first Parliament of the World's Religions, which was scheduled to convene in 1893 in Chicago, was the talk of the town. These discourses about religious pluralism were very much Christian-centric, as we know. They took Christianity as the norm against which other religions were assessed and compared. Christian missionaries from America and Europe bringing light to dark Africa was a repeated topic at the parliament. If you look at the table of contents, it's a repeated panel theme. So in other words, the equation of white, Christian, and Western was reinforced through the discourse about religious pluralism. American missionaries in the Middle East and elsewhere communicated the notions of world religions and emphasized in their teachings that the freedom to choose between different religions was a fundamental human right, while of course this was an incentive to convert to Christianity. So Kawkab was a voice in this environment of increased immigration, pronounced anti-immigration rhetoric, and rigorous debate about the relationship between race and religion. So how does Kawkab speak about race and religion? For this question, I turn to critical museum studies, which made important impact on historical research and literary analysis. The Hebrew Bible, the various books of the Hebrew Bible, for example, recently has been studied as an exhibition, just as a theoretical phase. The study of newspapers has also been a part of this conversation. The assumption is that the articles in a newspaper, like objects on display, are not inherently meaningful, right? They derive their meaning from the ways they are displayed and from their interaction with other objects on display, as well as those with the storage, those in the storage. So in this sense, newspapers are relatives of museums and world fairs as designed platforms to categorize and display knowledge and create meaning. With this understanding of newspapers, John Coward reads 19th century American newspapers as literary objects communicating American values through an exhibit of Native American stereotypes for a white audience. Jennifer Dubrow and my colleague Megan Robb approach Urdu newspapers as literary curations to be read as artifacts. Guided by these studies, I analyzed the articles of Kawkab as objects on display, all relational to each other, jointly creating a narrative around the centerpiece of the exhibition, namely Middle Eastern Christians in America. So briefly about this curatorial space, which is the pages of Kawkab. The paper consisted of 4 pages on 2 folios. The first page is in English, and at the back of which you'd find the 3rd page of the Arabic section. And the other folio consists of the first 2 pages in Arabic. Each page is divided into 4 columns, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, but mostly 4. And the length of the articles varies from half a column to multiple columns, and some of the articles also continue for multiple issues. So there's quite a broad variety. The articles also included increasingly more very elaborate drawings. So it was an expensive paper. The annual subscription rate was $3, which is about $100 today. And remember that the newspaper published in the Eastern State Penitentiary, about which we heard last week, was $1.50 per year. So this was quite expensive. In the first year, Kawkab was weekly a bilingual paper, 1 page in English, 3 pages in Arabic. But there is no correlation between the articles in English and those in Arabic. The 2 sections often published different content. The page in English and the first page in the Arabic section were allocated for news about politics, culture, military events, biographical notes about significant individuals, very generic news and mainstream news of that sort. And on the second and the third pages in Arabic, you could find short moralizing stories, telegrams, obituaries, business opportunities, and lists of new immigrants from the Middle East. The names are given in the form of lists. The English section spoke to audiences in America, and the Arabic section mostly spoke to, it addressed Middle Eastern immigrants in America. After the first year, Kawkab dropped the English, and it began to be published daily and only in Arabic. It was published until 1907. So in its 15-year life, Kawkab commented on domestic and international political developments, gave ethnographic information about communities near and far, exhorted its readers on moral and civilized behavior, and gave economic advice to immigrants. I call this a curation, but of course this curation cannot be construed as the product of a particular individual or group. Kawkab had different editors throughout its 15-year life, with reporters in America, as well as in Egypt, India, North Africa, Persia, and Syria. Moreover, the authors of most of the articles are just unknown. It is often unclear which articles were commissioned by the editors and which ones were translated from other journals and newspapers. But despite the complications of the curation approach, the representation of race in Kawkab has a certain grammar to it, somewhat consistent throughout the article. And the uncertainties surrounding the origins of the articles do not significantly impact the newspaper functioning as a curated discourse from the reader's perspective. With that note, and that extensive introduction, let's now walk through the pages of Kawkab. Race and racial differences are at the forefront of Kawkab, as seen in this opening note. The editors ask, or they first say, there are quite as many virtues and noble traits of character among the sons of Shem as among those of Yafet. They're referring to the famous passages in Genesis 5 and 9. Why then do these races misunderstand each other? What are the causes of indifference and apathy? Why do they not know each other better? And they say the answer is partly given by Kawkab. They promise that Kawkab is going to intermediate in this. So the editors place themselves among the sons of Shem and welcome the other Middle Eastern immigrants to the blessed land America in the Arabic section, which you see on the right here. Ahlan bikum ya bani al-watan, ahlan. So they welcome the Arabic immigrants and they say this is a blessed land that God granted. You have moved to America, but you are now in this blessed land. Religion and race are interlaced in the rhetoric used here. That's for sure. But the paper never explicitly conflates religion with race. The paper uses madhab and deen to refer to religion alternatingly. And it uses a variety of terms to refer to different scales of community, some of which can be translated as race, like Qawm, Banat Shem, Bani Israel, Ummah, Ahl. But there is no clear articulation of how these two groups of terms relate to each other. The two races, sons of Shem and sons of Yafet, seem to comprise of various madhabs according to Kawkab. I'll speak a bit more about Kawkab's treatment of religion, then we will return to race. Kawkab displays a pluralistic understanding of religion, according to which religions of the East and those of the West are equally valuable, and they both contribute to a civilized society. As I mentioned previously, the concept of world religion, with Christianity at its center, was in the process of developing around this time in the American intellectual landscape. But Kawkab did not subscribe to a Christian-centric understanding of pluralism. It rather highlighted the global importance of Eastern religion. It gave information about Islam. In fact, it repeatedly speaks about various tenets and features and various qualities of Islam. It gave information about Buddhism, ascetics in India, Jews in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and other traditions in quite positive terms. This is just a selection from those many articles about various religions of the East that Kawkab just brings to the attention and information of Western audiences. To be clear, there are many articles in Kawkab about Christian individuals, clergy, communities, and missionaries. As you see here, there are many of these missionary clerics whose work is praised in Kawkab. The Book of Mormon is talked about across multiple issues. In here, it talks in an Arabic, tiny Arabic section. It talks about a Presbyterian church gathering. It talks about exegesis of certain biblical verses. So Christianity is, of course, at the very forefront. And there is a numeric difference between the articles about Christianity and any other religion. Maybe articles about Islam a little bit compares, but not quite. But not all of these articles were positive in tone. An article, for example, criticizes a priest for lying about the authorship of his sermons, and there is a kind of a mocking title here, the ready speaker. He was ready to preach all the time, and he said all of those were his own sermons, but then it is found out that he was just copying from someone else's sermons. A few readers' letters complain about the Protestant missionaries in the Middle East for being hypocritical, sometimes corrupt, not caring for the local circumstances, and competing with other religious leaders. These letters are quite extensive, and they extensively talk about these negative images of the missionaries in the Middle East. Christians in Russia are mentioned in negative terms for forcing Jews to convert to Orthodox Christianity. So the paper praises and critiques Christians across the globe. In addition to placing most religions on equal ground and criticizing all of them across the board, the religious background of the founder, Orthodox Christianity, appears to be somewhat muted in the paper. Denominational differences between Christians are rarely mentioned, and Orthodox Christianity is almost absent, except for a few generic references. There is, for example, a year after the newspaper is found, there's an article about how the first Orthodox church in New York was built, and Orthodox Christians in Russia are mentioned. So the word Orthodox appears very rarely. But the religious identity of the founders are never mentioned as Orthodox Christianity. The editors refer to themselves as natives of the land of the book, as you see in this article. So the editors say, a subscriber asked as our opinion as natives of the land of the book about the meaning of the verse found in the 19th chapter of Matthew. So they established themselves as authority, as the rightful authority of biblical exegesis, as the natives of the land of the book, and they explain how libraries in Constantinople are very useful for this kind of exegetical work. So they established themselves as authority, but they never explicitly self-identify as Orthodox Christians. Religious identity of a person was praiseworthy for the editors of Kawkab only if they played good morals. Akhlaq is, in fact, a recurring theme in Kawkab. The spiritual benefit of the readers is at the forefront of the paper. And I should note that all of these articles, despite some of them having an English title, are in the Arabic section. They're all very short. They're all in Arabic. And they all talk about murders or some criminals, and in some cases how to treat a wife. In one case, how a man had a miraculously long life. So these are snippets of interesting information from everyday life in America, but the editors curate these news articles as a way to morally form and inform their readers. And even in this little explanation here, we see that the writer, the author of that article says, I'm sharing with you two stories. I did not include the stories here, but I'm sharing two stories here for the benefit of the reader. So the newspaper is very explicit in also establishing itself as a moral instructor. With such a broad morality-based representation of religion in Kawkab, the Syrian community behind the paper is implied to be morally upright and civilized members of society who belonged to an ecumenical, almost non-denominational form of Christianity. One may argue that this is due to an anxiety around the previously mentioned restrictions around immigration, that Syrians presented their cultural fit by downplaying denominational differences and highlighting their good morals. As I mentioned above, various religious minorities sought ways to present themselves as white or non-Black to navigate the racial requirements of immigration and citizenship legislation. And we can say that the editors of Kawkab, to this end, presented Syrians as culturally white and therefore invisible to governmental surveillance and legislation. But Kawkab's participation in the conversation about race was more complex than that. The paper does not equate whiteness with Christianity. It rather sets culture, intellect, progress, and morality as pillars of civilization, which could, according to Kawkab, encompass Eastern and Western races who could adhere to different religions, different mazhabs. So the newspaper constructs this very different structure for how religion and race relate to each other. Kawkab highlights Syrians' industriousness, but discourages them from dressing or behaving like Westerners in articles. Syrians were not supposed to look Western and white, but they were supposed to economically and culturally fit in, according to the editors. While highlighting the importance of progress and prosperity in their new home, Kawkab does not present those to be products of white Christianity. Just like piety and religion is not tied to a certain race in Kawkab, race is not tied to a phenotypical understanding of race. Kawkab displays an understanding of Black and white as categories. It uses these very terms, but there is no pro-white or anti-Black rhetoric in the paper. An article in Arabic, for example, speaks about how a man threw buckets of water over a Black man, Abd Aswad, that we see right here, from his balcony. And the article says the man who threw the water died as a sinner. In the same issue, again in Arabic, another article talks about a Black man, Ahad al-Zunuj, who murdered a woman and sold her body to a university in Philadelphia. In a later issue, a news article points out that Black people accused of various crimes, the article in the middle here, accused of various crimes are killed by mobs instead of being properly put to trial by law. The shame in the first article and the horror in the other two were directed toward a discourse of moral and lawful society. The articles did not develop a racial argument. Of course, the very fact that Blackness is mentioned in such stories when whiteness is not may indicate the normativity and invisibility of whiteness for the editors of the paper. But Kawkab also sometimes adopted anti-white language. It made clear that Syrians did not see themselves as white, as you see on the very short snippet here. A reader's letter furiously criticizes American missionaries for treating the locals in Syria like white Americans, al-American al-Bayaz, treated slaves in the past. So Syrians' fitness in the West was not defined in terms of their whiteness, but by their fitness for an orderly civilization. To put it differently, Kawkab navigates around phenotypical understanding of race and refers to Easterners and Westerners as different races to build an argument for both Qawm's value for civilization and progress. So neither white nor black. The editors of Kawkab wanted to demonstrate that Syrians, those industrious, morally upright, believing members of an ecumenical Christianity, were not strangers in America, neither black nor white. They were from the Eastern race and were worthy citizens of the West. The pages of Kawkab provided the flexible and transportable space to reiterate this message in many different combinations of articles about race, religion, and belonging. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Reyhan. It's absolutely fascinating. I am going to just stop the share for now so our Zoom folks can be seen. And the floor is open for questions and comments, please. Please, fire away.
Thanks so much for the talk again. I'm just studying the same period, and my focus is on the ABCF missionaries, and there was a lot to take from presentation. And you said the first issue of the newspaper was published in 1893. In 1893, you already mentioned there was the exhibition in Chicago, and there the Ottoman committee published another newspaper. I guess you can know. But the newspaper was sponsored by Reyhan al-Bustani, another favorite from Lebanon. But it was quite positive about the empire because it was sponsored by the empire.
Right.
In Star of America, do they talk about it in their first issues?
Talk about what?
The newspaper that al-Bustani and Reyhan and the Turkish committee there published.
Right. So Kawkab extensively reports on the Chicago exhibition. The editors are very, very excited about it. Not the parliament, but the exhibition. The fair itself is the big deal for them. But they do of course speak about Turks coming from the Ottoman Empire. But to my knowledge, as far as I remember from the issues I read, they do not talk about this alternative newspaper. And I can see them seeing themselves as the representative of Ottoman Empire in America. So I can see why they wouldn't mention another newspaper doing the same thing. And they're also very positive about, at least in the first year, they're very positive about the Ottoman Sultan. Although of course it is questioned because in their immigration petition they said they were persecuted. Yeah.
My second question is,
please.
So their discourse are overlapping with the Ottoman politician and the government politician, but strangely, if they said first word coming from there, actually the sponsor of the government-sponsored paper was Arab. Actually, he was from
right
as well. So that's quite interesting. They both have this first.
Right.
Sorry, government-sponsored paper.
Yeah.
In
the exhibition, in the same exhibition.
Okay.
So
the government of the Ottoman government paper.
Yes, but the person who was being the mediator there, the official was Reyhan al-Bustani. He was Arab, he was not Turkish, and he was proud to be Arab. He was nationalist. The other perspective is Armenian Orthodox. They also published a lot, and they were quite critical of the government as early as possible. Because in the 1895, Southern massacre started taking place. They were Orthodox too, and as I could understand from your syllabus, they were in interaction with the culture of Kawkab. But they were quite positive about the ABCF missionary. because missionaries saved their lives actually. While on the contrary, the writers of this newspaper are quite negative about missionaries. So how could they negotiate that with their fellow Orthodox Christians?
That is an excellent question. I have no insider letters or other communication. All I have is Kawkab, right? So as I read, of course, I can tell that they were working with Armenian Christians, but they did not seem to present, at least in the paper, that they were a persecuted group. Were they persecuted in the Ottoman Empire? That I don't know. Some scholars say they were, and they, as I said, they used that in their petitions. And of course, many Christian groups were persecuted to different extents in the Ottoman Empire in this time period. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. But once they start publishing this paper, they are very pro-Ottoman, at least in its early stage. And they present the Middle East as a pleasant place and as those Christians as the natives of the land of the book. So they have a particular way of presenting Middle Eastern Christians as truthful Christians, as the Christians of the Holy Land, but they never straight up say we are Orthodox Christians, and Orthodox Christianity is different than other Christianities in this and that way. So there is a muting of those denominational differences. That could be a strategic thing. That could also be because of the backgrounds of this family. They studied in Protestant schools. They had really close connections to various different denominations. So perhaps it just didn't matter for them that their family was originally an Orthodox family. It just seems to have not mattered or was just not important. They were interested in other things.
Do you know if they worshipped in Protestant churches in the U.S.?
So we know that they attended Quaker meetings.
Said that.
They do report on various churches in the newspaper. They say, for example, there's a particular preacher in that church in New York. Go and listen to it. He sings beautifully. The church is architecturally so gorgeous. So they inform their readers. This is in Arabic. Inform their Arabic-speaking readers about these different churches in New York. So they must have gone to some of these, right? So I think the denominational differences in my reading just did not matter to them that much.
Paul.
Thank you for this presentation. That's great. Very exciting stuff. I'm delighted to see so much of it's been digitized by the love. I had so two questions. One is the intellectual question. One is about Galata. The intellectual one, the phrase "Beni Watan" has a particular valence, doesn't it, at this time? It wasn't clear to me from the snippet because it was so short. When it says whatever, is the Watan the U.S. or is it Syria or is it the Arab world?
In my reading, it is Syria.
Okay.
Because after saying Beni Watan, then they say you left your place.
Right.
Settle in America. So Beni Watan is Syrian compatriots who reside in.
So very specifically then, Syria.
That's my reading, but of course now I'm doubting it because it's supposed to be Beni Watan.
Well, I just didn't know the purview of the newspaper was intended purely for the Syrian community of the area.
I think they address Syrians directly in multiple articles. The headline would be like a note to Syrians.
Right.
They explicitly for Syrians. They refer to themselves as Syrians. But that Beni Watan, I think that might have been intentionally a vague term to
I mean, it's early to be talking about Penn or something like that. So I'm not surprised that that's what's intended, but I wanted to check this because it was so striking. So the gossip philosophy one is about, I'm very interested in Al-Huda, which is not as early an Arabic newspaper, but it is better because it is based in Philadelphia. And I guess the Naum brothers who founded that were in the same circle. They're a Maronite, right? The founders of Huda.
Yes,
You,
And what year is that founded?
1898.
yeah,
That's true.
yeah, and end of the century. And what was the breakup there that happened? That was news to me. I wanted to.
So, Lisa Jacobs, I'm citing
Yeah.
her work here. She says there was a factionalism because these were Orthodox Christians and the other one, Maronite.
Yeah.
And if my memory is not failing me, it is about their approach and their attitude to the Ottoman Empire and their language about how to talk about the belief. And of course, there's a lot of talk about the missionaries and in the Middle East and immigrants in America and whether they did a good thing by immigrating to America or not. So there's a lot of international newspapers participating in. So the factionalism seems to be about those Middle Eastern alliances,
Yeah.
not continuing in a healthy way in the US. So the conversation about that, as far as I understand. And then, as that happens in Philadelphia, but it moves back to New York.
Right.
So I don't know what it's telling.
Right. That's so fascinating because otherwise they're very much the same background, the same. They're Protestant educated, they're immigrant community, they're based in New York, but for whatever reason they have this rupture, temporary anyway. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I have a question, but also maybe a minor contribution to Professor Cobb's question. I mean, I wonder if it's useful to point out that this is a time like prior Sykes-Picot and the carving of like Greater Syria. And when I was looking at a lot of the articles translation, most of the villages were villages that I recognize and know from Lebanon, contemporary.
Yeah.
That's where they are now.
Where they are now. So while I was reading it, I was always kind of wondering the same question: where is Beni Wafa located geographically, and how much of it is Syria and Lebanon? And, exactly. I mean, Greater Syria. I would agree with the professor. Yeah, Greater Syria
Right.
is the most logical.
I think it looks like it, and but welcome all Beni Wafa, like that. To me, that sounds like either free and Arab national stage. That sounds like welcome to.
So my question, I was really struck and really just impressed with so much of your insights on the questions of ethics and the role that the newspaper played in building up this community and creating this like Eastern race and the moral and ethical standards that are expected. But I wondered from your insights and your perspective, to what extent do you feel this part of this newspaper, the project of the community, it itself felt that it was engaging in the kind of critique also of American society. That there are instances where it wasn't just about telling the Syrian community how to behave, but also feeling that it was part of itself was an active and confident contributor to shaping fabric of American society.
Right. I don't. It is not my reading that they criticize America as a morally corrupt place. They very much praise American hard work and progress and good people in America doing good work, building beautiful buildings. So there is no explicit anti-American morality here. But of course, the examples they bring up in these more likely stories are all American people, white or black. There is, for example, I can remember only one article that is about a person, a Jewish man who murders a Moroccan. So there is that example of non-Americans doing something horrible. Other than that, all the other examples are coming from American society. So how to read that? My reading is that they weren't judging American society. They were just establishing themselves as
moral instructors, as people who know what is right and wrong. So as people who could criticize, who were claiming that that public authority of moral knowledge, how they are enforce that knowledge, and how they can actually assess different facts based on that enforced quality of morality. So I think it's more about their self-fashioning. It's an internal statement rather than a critique of them.
One quick follow-up. Do you feel like the newspaper was, I mean, you showed us how it's related to the other cultural, other types of racist and language communities at the time. But did you feel that it sounded kind of insular and isolated, a conversation that's just happening within, rather than across?
That's an excellent question. So who reads the paper? We don't know. If the paper itself says we have hundreds and thousands of readers everywhere in the world, I don't know. And there are also news articles that tell the readers about how Syrians were attacked in New York. So clearly they were being discriminated as Easterners and a different place, and whatever was going on, there were mobs that were fleeing Syrians in New York. So they weren't as accepted in the community as they were claimed to be. So to me, this speech is happening mostly internally, but also this speech is happening. This is a discourse directed towards American government. Just to like they were good citizens, but it was I don't think they were trying to educate the broad New York community, especially because most of the moralizing stories were written in Arabic. So it was directed to bilingual strata of society and the American government and the top advocacy of this speech is clearly
Please, in the back, and then we'll go to Peter, and then back. Yeah, please.
I think that I've talked generated a lot of new questions and trying to
Speak up as much as you can so that Zoom can hear you. Yeah.
trying to distill this into one question. So my question for you is, what kind of Arabic is it? Why did they choose that? This is coming from someone who knows nothing about 19th-century Arabic. But it struck me when you had the title card up there really big that it's not Kawkab Amrika, but Kawkab Amrika.
yeah.
And also they're Orthodox, and I'm curious what kind of Orthodox they are, why they choose Arabic as opposed to a liturgical language or another vernacular. In the 1890s, we're getting Neo-Aramaic written down for the first time. Our first Neo-Aramaic immigrants to the U.S. by 1906, earlier, 1906 was the earliest I know of. But yeah, why choose this particular dialect?
Yeah, so these are Arabic-speaking Syrians, and that is very common for Greek-speaking churches to not use that liturgical language in everyday life. They were most probably educated in Arabic. They were Syrians. The Adili family is from Adil. So they were high majority of an Arabic-speaking community, both in Damascus and in Beirut. And they are all, I don't know if they spoke another language in their communities. They most probably were Greek Orthodox, so their liturgical language must have been Greek. But I'm not sure. Again, there is just no information about that in the newspaper itself. Most of this tangential information, or rather anecdotal information, is actually coming from interviews with the descendants of these families, both in the Middle East and in the West. So whatever they told is what we have, and there are in that information. So I'm not totally sure. This is my assumption so far that they why this language? This is a very highly journalistic Ottoman Arabic. As far as I can tell, there are close connection to the Ottoman bureaucracy. There is a claim that they were actually sent by the Ottoman Empire to the Fed.
Wow.
That's how they transported that calligraphic manifestation and with the sponsor of the empire. So they seem to have navigated with a high the language and calligraphy and the efforts to design and really
Okay, so we really need to come back to what you just said about the press and, but let's go to Peter on Zoom, Peter Salad.
Hi, Reyhan. That was unmuted. That was really a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And one of the things I think that interests me so much is that you have this huge range in terms of time. So what my question, there are two questions really. The first is what counts as a Christian? I mean, what does it mean to be a Christian? Because it changes so much from what your earlier work is. So what's actually happening, you know, like when you say that they go to a Quaker, you know, that they go to a Quaker meetings, Quakers were actually being executed in Massachusetts in the late 17th century. In other words, they didn't count as Christians. They weren't Christians according to Massachusetts law. So they're outsiders. And in the 19th century, my sense is that for Protestants, particularly for many Protestants, the question of Catholics gets interrelated with questions specifically about Italians and the Irish. And so the question is, are they white? You know, so are they really white? And it's bound up with religion. So the question of race comes into the question of religiousness in a certain way. But I'm thinking that, you know, also with the emergence of groups like the Mormons, I literally have no idea about this. Are they considered Christians? And they're missionaries too. So when one thinks about Christian missionaries, a lot of the emphasis has been upon colonial missionary activities, but lots of missionaries don't have state support behind them. They're actually, and that's increased in the present situation. I mean, it's massive in the former Soviet Union, the amount of missionary work being done by different evangelical groups with no support behind them. So that's one question, and so it's related to that, to the question of race, as I say, which I mean, the question of race then is to what extent in the late 19th century does the question, I mean, to what extent are Orthodox Christians, for instance, is that a problem about religion, not just about race, but about religion? I mean, to what extent is it, is in some sense, and that's certainly happening with Jews. I mean, to what extent are Jews racialized? And what interested me is that by and large, what you were showing is that there's an attack upon the Russians for being anti-Semitic in the paper. And that interests me a lot, is that, in other words, that they're seen as the not properly civilized people. So in other words, that kind of Orthodox Christianity is negative in relationship to Jews. So, okay.
Thank you so much for these questions, Peter. I'll just briefly mention them because these are, I think, huge conversations. I hope you and I get to just come together and talk about these more. But what is a Christian is an excellent question, and that I think depends on who you're asking. The Mormon Church, for example, the Church of Latter-day Saints, was not invited to the World Parliament of Religion. So they were excluded, just like, of course, other communities like Native American religions was not represented there, but the LDS wasn't invited. So I think there was definitely a group that did not see them as Christians. The paper Kawkab talks about them. I can't remember if they refer them as Christians. I don't think they do, but they do give extensive information about the Ottoman. So what you're absolutely right that when I think about all the broad chronology, which I heard for the Middle Ages, I take it for granted that Christians were Christians, and then but then once we come to a closer time period, because I don't know, people have been to all of kinds of temples, and they started to different kinds of religious identities depending on the circumstances. And hopefully I can answer a little better with my second project, which is Christianity question mark. So that is a whole book of stuff. So and the other one, orthodoxy and race, is another excellent one because the editors never refer to Orthodox Christians as a different race, but Katolikia, and Katolikia. So they say the Catholic, however we may want to translate that. So the Catholic community, the Catholic world. So they definitely isolate a Catholic community, which necessitates, in my understanding, that they must have taught other denominations as separate groups somehow, but they never articulate that bit in the English parts of the paper, so it becomes a transition problem. But thank you again. Excellent questions, and hopefully in the published version, I will try to say more about it.
Could you try to gauge some of that by looking at the representations of Italians or Irish, and there is a kind of code for a discourse on Catholicism in the paper?
Right. So by this time, 1890s, Irish and Italian are white bi-European descent. They are no longer among those excluded in Eastern Europe. They have Caucasian descent. They have
It's unclear. Well, I don't know.
So I think these processes have been at least ongoing, and there must have been some debate about whiteness of Irish and Italian. But the Orthodox, these are all Easterners, so they still have, I think, a long way to go to show their racial fit. But we have court reports, for example, that in which we see Syrians say, we also come from Caucasia, so we are also, are you white? So they use language that does not explicitly say black or white, but they are arguing for cultural whiteness in and of course being Christian was always part of that, at least for Syrian Christian. I'm just thinking out loud right now, rather than answering your question, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Please, back.
Thank you for your company. And my question is building upon the question, but also a little bit speculative, in a way that I imagine that these individuals that we're talking about became to the United States as adults. So the notion of Christianity, the notion of race, the notion of religion is in a way like for them as being like fundamentally constructed in an environment, in a post-Islam environment, like post-reform period and like Nakba period, Syria, Lebanon. And based on some activities works, for example, or Mark Shafi's work, we know that it's a very vibrant. There's a very deep discussion about the Christianity itself. So I would like to, in a way, speculative part of this question is really, I wouldn't be surprised if Ottoman government actually being funded and bringing because in a way maybe the audience is back home in a way, particularly because there's so many American missionaries treatment of the locals as slaves. So, like, how to really just like this cross, and you know, the CUP is doing the same thing. They're publishing something, sending out the Ottoman Empire at the same time. It's kind of like a place where all these like printing presses are circulating. So it's really interesting to think about, to imagine and speculate about how, in a way, in the back of their mind, there are people back home in a way to promote American life and the freedom that it comes that's lacking at home, but also the understand race is a completely different construct that they're also kind of like carrying us back into the United States. I'm speculating, so
No.
would you like to speculate about that?
100%. Everything you said, everything that you said, absolutely. It is. I couldn't include it in this presentation, but of course, their formation in the Middle East is a big part of all of this debate. They did not have American way of understanding and construing race. So we definitely see that Middle Eastern understanding of race in mid 19th century shaping how they talk about different communities, ethnic or religiously defined. And about this newspaper also being oriented towards the Ottoman world, absolutely, they say so, and I'm willing to believe them that that newspaper reached the Ottoman land. It was being shipped there. I don't know how many, and I don't know who received it, and I don't know who read it. But I'm absolutely willing to trust them that some issues definitely reached the Ottoman land, and it was multi-directional and transnational in that sense. It wasn't just an isolated community talking about themselves. It definitely was a transnational. Again, I don't know who received it, but definitely all of those Ottoman identities passed through America and reached probably back to
I push on this a little bit more because now it's come up twice, and I think this is really changes the shape of your project if it is no longer a New York story, sort of immigrant story in that way. What, if anything, is the evidence for a sponsorship by some kind of Ottoman? What does that mean, and what is the evidence of anything? And then I have some questions about how I think it'd be great to push you on distribution. But it's hard, but it sounds like there's some archival work that needs to be done here in one place or another to see where these things really went. And if no one has done this work, I hope you do it.
I hope I find stuff.
Well, there must be something. I mean, maybe not, but
I would like to join you in this effort.
Absolutely. No,
I also have an idea where they found printing press. And I would like to show the copies of the newspaper published by the Turkish committee in the exhibition. We may compare the letters. I highly suspect they will be coming from the same printing press. Because when I said Al-Bustani became the mediator and he put in his money as a merchant, rich merchant from he ordered the printing press as well. The Turkish committee had their own printing press and an office where Ubeydullah Efendi was the editor and Ebüziyat Tevfik Efendi provided the organizer of the pages for them. So if the letters are matching, probably it's the same printing press. It also explains why their discourses were overlapping in the first issue of your newspaper.
Right.
So they were not.
it might mean the same type boundary, not necessarily the same printing press. We have to figure out what is the same. This is, typecast Arabic letters.
Yeah, because these are also not commonly found in the United States. They had to bring them from their homeland.
Right,
That would
which
be
is much easier to report, sure.
And why not the public both of the newspaper?
Right now, it is still possible. The same press published also Ibrahim al-Biruni book. So I think it's one.
But we don't know what Al-Bustani's motive is, because we know that the Sublime Porte was trying to construct its relationship with the United States, because diplomatically they saw that, especially after the Crimean War, the British pretty much lost all their hope to the integrity of the prisoners. That was very costly, and impossible they still open cards and have to despite all the British efforts. So Ottoman government was already looking for an ally, a strong one, and American industry and economy was attracted now. We know that in one of the actually archival documents, there was a very big earthquake. I forgot the location. Ottoman government was among the donors. They sent money and their goodwill to the government of the United States.
You and I should talk.
Yeah.
I should definitely exchange
So
some emails.
a lot of things are coming together with what I've been studying so far. I know where the archives is also.
Sorry, you had a question on?
I had a question that was more following up on a lot question about ethics and morality, and I was wondering, because I know that they didn't consider that you had to be Christian to be a moral person, but I wonder if they had a discourse still of morality that tied it to a theological or scriptural basis, more directed toward their own people. They didn't.
That is an excellent question, and I tried to address that in the article that is coming up. I'm really lamenting the fact that I couldn't put all of this out of the question for you. No scriptural base. It's never tied to a verse in any holy book. It is always around this like emotional sphere. There is a horror story, and they say how immoral it is, how horrible it is. Being of imprisoned people is awful. They should be put to trial in an appropriate way. And then the other person shouldn't bully the other person. So there is that rhetoric of how horrendous these acts are and how people should gain from them, but they never tie to any scripture. And an immoral person could be found in any religious tradition. There are examples from Muslims, Jews, and Christians being identified as such, doing moral things. So it's not Christian morality, it is not scriptural morality. I love that bit of the story.
I have a question in line with that broader discussion we've been having about what kind of community is that on the paper. And one thing I guess to clarify from something you mentioned in earlier, the Arabic language editions, they were making lists of, they were publicizing lists of new immigrants. Yeah. I think in your words, from the Middle East. And I'm curious, like, is that Middle East, is that a language community and who gets included in that? Is it just Syrians or is it, okay, so it's not really considering folks coming in from other parts of the Arabic speaking world or other parts of the Ottoman Empire.
I can't remember the full list here, but actually where they come from is not generally articulated in terms of the broader Syria. They mentioned from which ports they put on the ship and where they landed and their names, which hotels they are supposed to be residing, if anybody wants to help them. So there is a network building happening in New York. So their names are held extensively, but their background, they are just practically Syrians, if it is mentioned at all. But it is very interesting how those lists, they are actually creating those things. What is called
you get a sense, I guess, you mentioned this explicitly, but from the names, is it just Christians or Christians and Muslims in your community?
That is never mentioned. Some of the names are, of course, like Yohanna, Tuma, so I hear Christianity, but I mean, Najib Arbili and Ibrahim Arbili sound as not like Muslims as well. So I think by just massive country,
Thank you so much. I'm so curious because you said that they only published the English portion for a year, and you have these double titles for each of the articles. And what's interesting is a couple of questions around: did they carry over the English titles later on, or did they totally get rid of it? It was totally in Arabic. And do they talk about why they're transitioning to Arabic only?
So they do not, because I do not have that transition volume. Okay. Many issues are just lost, and that transition issue is among those. So I don't know if they explained it. The very first issue, English and Arabic, that also does not have English titles, the Arabic articles. And then with the second issue, they start with English titles. So they must have just decided that they need for guidance of their readers. So they do that. And then once they switch to fully Arabic version of the newspaper, nothing in English other than a couple names of companies
opposite direction than you might have expected with a sort of typical whatever assimilation story. You know, here we are.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, if they did so much in English, presumably they're thinking about an audience which may have not turned out to be the audience, and therefore had to transition.
They got more Arab-speaking people.
Right.
They started coming in. Probably in the earlier years there were fewer, but once we got more immigrants
Right.
needed.
And again, we don't know, when it comes to Arabic section, we can speculate, it can be Ottoman subject, it can be Arabic speaking, New York or outside the US, but we have no idea who read English. They barely spoke the editors and the New York Daily Herald Press, they didn't know English. They had to learn it later. Who was reading the newspaper in English is a bigger question for me, and they must have decided after a year that it was just not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, but the assumption that there was going to be an English-speaking audience, but it's interesting and how it transforms into something solely for an Arabic-speaking audience is really interesting because it tells us about where they thought it, you know, what they were doing and how it changed so radically.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I think Reyhan has demonstrated that the late 19th century can be as complicated and mysterious a place as the late antique. Just as many questions. So we look forward to hearing about this project, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
And please join us for supper, anybody who would like to. The sound of my voice.
Thanks for a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Peter.
Great.